A single shaft of early light pierced through the bent slats of the blinds, catching on the dust that hovered in the stillness. The classroom was gray, the kind of gray that settled in the bones, quiet and unmoving. Ezra Whitlow stood near the chalkboard, a sliver of white chalk poised between his fingers, the remnants of past lessons smudged across the board behind him. The date, 1865 to 1877, was written neatly, underlined twice. "Imagine," he said softly, almost as if not to wake the walls. "You were born in chains and lived to cast a vote. That your son could sit in Congress while the memory of cotton fields still lingers in your lungs." A few students looked up. Most didn't. He knew the rhythm of disinterest. He'd learned long ago not to fight it directly, just to let the truth rest long enough to germinate. Nathan, seated in the second row, was the only one truly listening. His eyes flicked from Ezra to the phone he half hid in his lap. Recording, probably. That happened more often now. Before Ezra could continue, the school intercom crackled to life, cutting through the moment like a blade through cloth. "Attention staff," came the too cheerful voice. "Please remember to collect your updated instructional materials from the main office by the end of the day. Thank you, and have a wonderful Wednesday." The intercom clicked off. Ezra blinked slowly. He turned and placed the chalk down with the care of someone setting a fragile object on stone. His spine straightened. "History," he said, softer now, "is not a fixed thing. It bends. And too often, it breaks." The bell rang. The students shuffled out. Nathan lingered for a second longer, then followed the stream. Ezra watched him go, then turned back to erase the board with deliberate strokes. Later that day, on his walk to the staff parking lot, he took the long route past the school's front entrance. That's when he saw it. The mural was gone. Where once there had been color, 20 feet of paint and pride, there was now only blank, beige wall. Smooth, fresh, lifeless. The mural had been painted 10 years ago by students under the guidance of a local black artist. It depicted a black rail worker handing a wrench to his young son, with factory smokestacks rising in the distance, and a line of workers stretching into history. It had been a quiet tribute, not grand, not confrontational, but it had stood, and now it didn't. Ezra stood rooted in place, the chill climbing up his spine despite the spring sun overhead. There was no sign, no explanation, no vandalism, just absence. He turned slowly, walked back inside. In the main office, a box sat on the counter with a laminated sign taped to it. New curriculum, U.S. History, grade 11. He didn't touch it. Instead, he drove home without turning on the radio. His house sat quietly on the edge of town, where the fields grew tall in summer and the past felt close. At the door, a thick manila envelope jutted from his mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just his name. He carried it to the kitchen, where the light was dim and the kettle still cooling from morning. Inside the envelope was a typed memo. Curricular alignment directive, effective immediately. As part of a district-wide initiative to ensure historical neutrality and foster an inclusive environment, all educators are instructed to use only the approved instructional materials provided. Supplementary content must be submitted for prior review. Topics deemed divisive, politically sensitive, or outside the scope of balanced historical context are to be avoided. He read it twice, then folded it neatly and slid it beneath the photograph pinned to the fridge, a black and white image of his grandfather, Clarence Whitlow, standing outside a protest line in 1968, holding a sign that read, "We built this." Ezra sat at the kitchen table for a long time, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on nothing. Outside, the sun sank slowly behind Marrowbone's skeletal trees, and the last warmth of day fled the room. In that silence, something inside him shifted, not loudly, but like a floorboard beginning to crack. The boxes came on a cloudy Monday, wheeled into the front office by a man Ezra didn't recognize, someone from the district warehouse, probably. He said nothing, just left the boxes and walked back out into the drizzle, the dolly squeaking as he went. Ezra approached the counter. The boxes were sealed in thick brown tape. A printed label on top read, Foundations of American History, State-Approved Edition, 12th Printing. The secretary, Ms. Loomis, handed him a clipboard. "Sign here to confirm receipt," she said, smiling tightly. "We're all switching over by next week." "Is there a guide?" Ezra asked. "There's a pacing chart in the back. And talking points." She looked away. "It's all very digestible." Ezra didn't reply. He carried the box to his classroom, its weight strangely personal. Inside, each textbook gleamed under plastic, their covers a bright montage of unity. Children of every shade smiling in front of a sunny schoolhouse, flags waving, progress radiating. He opened one. The first chapter, Colonial America, a Land of Opportunity. The next, Revolution, the Pursuit of Freedom. Then Slavery, a short section, framed largely in economic terms, absent names, absent scars. There were no chains, no lashes, no songs sung through tears. The page on the Civil War emphasized conflicting interpretations of state rights and labor systems. There was no mention of Frederick Douglass, no Sojourner Truth, no Harriet Jacobs. Jim Crow laws were described as local governance issues. Lynching was not mentioned. The civil rights era was condensed to a timeline. Brown versus Board, the Civil Rights Act, a sentence on Rosa Parks. He flipped to the chapter labeled Contemporary Reflections on Race. It was 2 pages. The word racism appeared once, softened into a broader conversation about interpersonal misunderstandings. Ezra closed the book. That evening, at the faculty lounge, he brought it up. The room was filled with the smell of reheated food and burnt coffee. "I looked through the new history text," he said carefully. "Some omissions." From behind a newspaper, Mr. Donnelly, the economics teacher, spoke without looking up. "It's streamlined, clean, makes our jobs easier. It also erases half the fight," Ezra said. Donnelly shrugged. "We're not supposed to fight, Ezra. We're supposed to teach." Later that day, Ezra received a calendar invite, meeting with Principal Cardell, 4 p.m. Her office was dim, the blinds drawn. A small plant wilted in the corner. She gestured for him to sit, her expression practiced. "We've had some concerns," she began. "Preemptive ones, I mean. About tone, content. The state's guidelines are specific. They don't want children made to feel burdened." Ezra leaned forward. "By facts." Cardell inhaled slowly. "By things they can't change. We're being told to foster unity. By pretending pain never happened. By teaching what they consider appropriate," she said sharply. Then softened. "I know this is difficult, but we need stability right now. No disruptions." Ezra left without responding. That night, he walked into his study, pulled out the archive box he'd salvaged from the church basement. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside were stories that no textbook would touch. He removed a photograph, his grandfather again, this time standing in front of the steel mill with other workers, each one holding a lunch pail and exhaustion in their eyes. Ezra set the photo on his desk. Then, deliberately, he placed the new textbook beside it. He opened both, compared them. One told a truth the other couldn't bear. The next morning, the textbooks sat unopened on his students' desks. Ezra taught instead from memory, voice steady, as if speaking through fog. He told them about the burning of homes during forced migrations. He spoke of the towns erased from maps, of the music that carried sorrow like fire. He didn't look at Nathan's phone this time. Let it record. Let someone try to stop him. Outside the classroom, the hallway was quiet. But something unseen had shifted. The silence had started listening. The stairs to the church basement creaked like bones settling in an old body. Ezra descended slowly, each footfall softened by the scent of earth and mildew, a quiet reminder that the past, when buried, never truly rests. This place had once been sacred, not for sermons, but for stories. The basement of Shiloh Baptist Church had housed the unofficial archive of Marrowbone's black community for decades. It wasn't recognized by the town or listed in any public database. It didn't need to be. The elders knew where the truth lived. But now, as Ezra reached the bottom step, his heart sank. Shelves once crowded with boxes were empty, their outlines marked in ghost dust. Where documents had once leaned, there were only pale squares against the concrete. Tables where testimonies had been transcribed now stood bare, scattered with a few curled pieces of paper and a plastic cup half filled with rainwater. He moved through the silence, calling out, "Calvin?" A moment later, a figure emerged from the shadows. Calvin Green, the longtime church custodian, walked with a slight limp, a rag in one hand and an apologetic expression in the other. "Didn't expect you today," Calvin said. "Heard you were busy at school." Ezra didn't respond. His eyes scanned the room again. "What happened here?" Calvin sighed. "Board came through last week. Said the space was a liability. Mold, they claimed. Claimed it wasn't properly preserved. Said it had to be cleared." "Cleared." Ezra stepped closer. "Where is everything?" "I saved what I could," Calvin said quietly. "Some of it's in the back. The rest," he hesitated. "Some folks from the county came. Took it away." Ezra walked quickly to the back room. On a folding table sat a single banker's box, frayed and sagging at the corners. He opened it like a coffin. Inside were scraps, pieces of a world that had been carefully assembled and now scattered. A child's essay on the first black-owned newspaper in town. A photograph of a sit-in at the old lunch counter. A faded flyer from 1972, Justice for Leon Bell. And then he saw it. A photograph he'd never seen before. His grandfather, Clarence, not at a protest, not behind a podium, but in a church kitchen, sleeves rolled, ladling soup into a bowl for an elderly woman. Behind him, painted on the wall, a mural that no longer existed, hands linked in a circle, brown and weathered, reaching toward a sun that bore no flag. Ezra sat down, the photograph trembling in his fingers. "They didn't want this gone because of mold," he murmured. "No," Calvin agreed. "They wanted it gone because it remembered." Ezra stayed there for hours. He read every piece left in the box. Testimonies written in tight, careful script. One was from a woman named Ora Bell who described her attempts to attend the White High School in 1954. She had been turned away every day for 3 months before giving up. "They told me to wait," she wrote. "I waited 23 years. He copied that sentence in his own notebook, slowly, deliberately. When he finally stood to leave, he turned to Calvin. "Thank you for what you saved." Calvin nodded. "I knew you'd come. Knew you'd care." Outside, the day had dimmed into a soft, colorless dusk. Ezra drove home in silence, the box of relics seat-belted beside him like a fragile passenger. At home, he laid the photo of his grandfather beside the letter from the school board. 2 versions of history, one buried, one enforced. That night, he didn't sleep. He spread the documents across his floor like puzzle pieces from a dream. Each fragment whispered something vital. Each absence screamed louder. By morning, Ezra had made a decision. He brought the photograph to school, slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. He wouldn't share it. Not yet. But he wanted it near his heart when he spoke. That day, he did not open the textbook. Instead, he began class with a single sentence, drawn from memory and Defiance. History lives in the things they try to erase. It began in the small spaces, those thin cracks where the air turned colder, where people no longer looked directly at him. Ezra noticed it in the silence of morning greetings left unanswered, in the way conversations hushed when he entered the staff lounge. The change didn't come with confrontation. It came with absence. Meredith, the English teacher who once shared books and laughter with him over weak coffee, now kept her door closed. The social studies department stopped replying in the group chat. During lunch duty, a teacher who once offered gum passed by without a glance. The school had shifted, and Ezra was no longer part of the architecture. Even the students were different. Nathan, once curious and engaged, now slouched in his seat, eyes fixed on his phone. Kayla, who had stayed after class to ask thoughtful questions, no longer lingered. Others stared blankly when he taught from outside the textbook, their silence not of awe, but calculation. Then came the email. Subject: Student Experience Concern. Mr. Whitlow, we have received a complaint from a parent regarding the emotional tone of your recent lessons. The student expressed discomfort, stating they felt unfairly implicated and ashamed to be American. Please ensure adherence to approved curriculum to avoid further escalation. Regards, Principal Cardell. Ezra read the message 3 times, each word heavier than the last. Ashamed to be American. The phrase sat like a bruise on his screen. He didn't reply. Instead, he pulled out the red-lined map of Marrowbone he had used the day before, studying the thick crimson boundary that wrapped tightly around his neighborhood like a noose. He imagined someone reading this map and still claiming discomfort at being reminded. That evening, he visited his sister's house on the west side of town. Her porch light was already on, glowing amber through the mist. She opened the door with a worried look, pulling him into a hug that lingered too long. They're watching you now, she said quietly. You know that. I've known that for weeks, he answered. They sat in her kitchen while her children played upstairs. His niece laughed, bright, untamed. It made the silence between him and his sister even heavier. You think this is worth it? She asked. I don't know what else to do, Ezra replied. I won't teach lies. She stirred her tea, not meeting his eyes. You could lose everything, Ezra. I already have. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I just want you safe. When he returned home, he found an envelope slipped under his door. No stamp. No signature. Inside was a single slip of paper. 5 words. You're not invisible. Watch yourself. He folded the note carefully and placed it in the same drawer as the school board memo. The next morning, Ezra walked into room 212 and opened a folder that wasn't approved. He taught about redlining again, this time with photographs, personal testimonies, maps layered over the school's current zoning. He spoke clearly, not angrily. But he didn't soften the truths. After class, Kayla stayed behind for just a moment. Thank you, she said. For not stopping. Ezra nodded. Thank you for staying. She hesitated. They told my mom about me being here after class. She said to keep my head down. He gave a small, tired smile. Some heads were meant to be lifted. Later that day, Principal Cardell called him into her office again. Her tone was clipped, almost weary. There's now a formal complaint, she said. This can't continue. Then stop me, Ezra said. I'm trying to protect this school. No, he said quietly. You're trying to protect comfort. She looked at him with something like sadness. Is there any version of this where you just teach what's on the page? Ezra stood. I'm already teaching what's written. You just don't like what it says. That night, as he walked past the mural wall, he paused. The beige paint was still smooth, still uncracked. He reached out a hand and placed his palm flat against it. He didn't say anything, but his hand stayed there a long time, as though trying to feel through the layers to something alive underneath. Ezra arrived before sunrise. The hallways were still dark, the school asleep in its bones. He unlocked room 212, turned on the desk lamp, and sat in silence, listening to the hum of the building waking. The morning announcements were still an hour away, but he wasn't here to prepare the lesson from the pacing guide. He had brought something else. He opened his worn leather satchel and laid out materials he had no permission to use, copies of redlining documents, housing covenants with exclusionary clauses, photos of families standing in front of homes they were never allowed to buy. He placed them beside a map of Marrowbone from 1939, shaded with thick red lines and stamped, undesirable. The textbook sat unopened on his desk, pristine and irrelevant. When the students arrived, he greeted them as always, calm and poised. There was tension in the air. Word had spread about the warning, the complaints. Ezra could feel the wariness in the room. Eyes flicked to him, then to the documents spread across the front table. Nathan didn't hide his phone this time. He set it on his desk, angled up, recording openly. Ezra didn't care. He began. Today we're going to talk about geography. Not the kind with rivers and mountains, but the kind with borders drawn in invisible ink. The kind that decides where you're born, where you live, and what you're allowed to dream. He unfolded the red-lined map. This is Marrowbone. This is your town. Your street, probably. This map was created to keep people out. Not just houses, but schools, hospitals, parks, hope. A few students shifted uncomfortably. One boy whispered to another. Ezra ignored it. These lines weren't just ink. They were law. And those laws built the world you now live in. He picked up a deed from 1946 and read aloud. No lot may be sold to any person not of the Caucasian race. Kayla, sitting near the window, clenched her pen. A white student near the back crossed his arms, lips tight. Ezra pressed forward, unflinching. He showed a photograph of a black family standing outside a burned home. A newspaper clipping that labeled them agitators. A zoning ordinance that displaced 400 residents. The room was silent by the end, but it wasn't a silence of disinterest. It was charged. Alive. As the students left, Nathan stayed behind just long enough to offer a nod, not quite approval, but recognition. Kayla lingered near the door. You know they're going to say you crossed a line. I didn't cross it, Ezra said. I uncovered it. That evening, as he stepped into the parking lot under a steel-colored sky, he noticed something tucked beneath his windshield wiper. It wasn't an official letter this time. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper. Watch your back. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. Ezra didn't react. He folded the note carefully and placed it in the same drawer as the first memo and the unsigned complaint. They belonged together now, a paper trail of resistance and warning. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room with the archive box beside him, flipping through documents, rereading old testimonies. Some names he recognized. Others were just shadows. At some point, without fully deciding to, he began to record himself. Not a lecture. A statement. He spoke into his phone, slowly and clearly. This is what they don't want taught, he said, holding up the map. Not because it's false, but because it's true. He uploaded the video. Private for now, but ready. The next morning, Principal Cardell walked into his classroom mid-lesson. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. She stood in the back with arms folded as Ezra explained the legacy of redlining and generational poverty. When the bell rang, she waited until the students had filed out. Then she approached. You're documenting now? She asked, nodding toward the phone. I am. And you know this can't go on. Ezra looked at her. It's already gone on too long. She stared at him a moment longer, then turned and left. That night, he returned to the mural wall. This time, he brought a scraper. He knelt in the dark, the paint blade glinting beneath the streetlight. The first stroke made a soft, wet sound as it peeled away the beige. Then another. Then another. Slowly, beneath the overcoat of silence, a shape began to emerge. A line. A cheekbone. An eye. His grandfather's face. Not erased. Just hidden. And Ezra kept scraping. The suspension letter arrived in a sealed envelope, slid under his classroom door before the morning bell. No eye contact. No voice. Just white paper and finality. Ezra opened it at his desk, alone. The words were cold and structured. You are hereby placed on administrative leave pending review of instructional conduct and material usage. This action is non-disciplinary but preventative. Preventative. As if truth were a disease. He placed the letter down beside the photograph of his grandfather that had lived in his coat pocket for weeks. The image looked back at him with quiet defiance. When he left the school building that afternoon, his keycard had already been deactivated. It beeped uselessly against the door. At home, Ezra sat in silence. The television remained off. The lights dimmed. Outside, the wind moved through the skeletal trees like breath through teeth. He laid the letter on the kitchen table and watched the sun sink behind the fields. Later that evening, he visited his mother's house. She answered the door slowly, her back bent with years, her eyes alert despite her silence. They sat across from one another in the living room where his father's recliner still sagged untouched. She didn't ask why he came. She already knew. I taught what happened, he said softly. That's all. You taught what they didn't want said out loud, she replied. I can't pretend anymore. His mother folded her hands over her lap. They erased your grandfather's name from the books, Ezra. Now they want to erase yours before it ever gets there." He looked away. "I won't let them." She didn't answer. She only reached forward and touched his hand, fingers soft, trembling, but sure. That night, he drove to the house his sister shared with her children. Her porch light was off. When she opened the door, she looked tired, angry in a way that came from fear. "I told you," she said before he even stepped inside. "I warned you." "I know. They've been calling here. Someone told Kayla's mom that she was staying after class with you. Now she's being harassed. Do you understand what that means? You're dragging other people into this." Ezra's throat tightened. "I didn't ask them to defend me, but they are. And it's not going to stop with you losing your job. These people don't forgive disobedience. You're stirring up ghosts." "I'm trying to unbury them," he said. His sister's voice cracked. "We've all learned how to survive here. You think you're saving something, but you're just throwing yourself on a fire that's already burned us too long." He said nothing more. There was nothing else to say. That night, he returned to the mural wall. The street was empty. The town slept in its denial. Ezra knelt by the concrete. With gloved hands, he pulled the scraper from his coat pocket again. The strokes were rhythmic, deliberate. The paint peeled slowly, like skin from old fruit. He worked for an hour before he saw it, the full shape of a face. His grandfather's. Strong brow, deep-set eyes. A mouth half open, as if in speech. Ezra reached up and touched the image, fingers shaking. Behind him, the mural light buzzed faintly. He did not cry. He just breathed. The next morning, the town paper ran a headline. "Suspended teacher defaces school property amid curriculum controversy." Below it, a cropped image. Ezra's back to the camera, then in the act of scraping. They called it vandalism. No one said it was a restoration. Ezra didn't defend himself. He didn't speak to reporters or issue a statement. Instead, he spent the day organizing the contents of the archive. He labeled folders, digitized photos, scanned documents into a public drive. He wrote a short preface to the collection. This is not a full history, only the parts that someone tried to erase. Then he printed the photograph of his grandfather, framed it, and placed it in his window facing the street. Cars slowed when they passed. Some looked, some didn't. The school board announced a public meeting for the following week. A review. An official ruling. Ezra marked the date on his calendar, not because he expected justice, but because he had one last story to tell, and this time they would hear it. The school board meeting was held in the high school gymnasium, the same place where Ezra once sat as a student beneath peeling championship banners and the dusty scoreboard that had never been replaced. Tonight, the bleachers were pulled out, and the overhead lights buzzed with a hum that vibrated just beneath the skin. He arrived early, alone, dressed simply, a dark jacket, the same shoes he taught in, and the photograph of his grandfather tucked beneath his arm like armor. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where the board members sat in a silent line. Name placards, bottles of water, expressions like marble. Around the room, parents gathered in clumps, some familiar, some curious. Teachers lingered along the walls, keeping distance. A few students sat near the back, Kayla among them, hood up, eyes fixed ahead. Nathan sat beside her, hands in his lap. The meeting began with formalities. Roll call, agenda approval, a summary of the incident. Ezra waited without speaking, the photograph resting on his lap. He had not come to plead. When they called his name, he stood and walked slowly to the center microphone. The air shifted. Cameras from 2 local stations adjusted their focus. Phones lifted. Ezra looked at the board, then at the crowd. "This town has always had 2 histories," he began. "The one you print, and the one we passed down." He held up the photograph of Clarence Whitlow, captured mid-step, leading a line of workers down Main Street in 1968. Hand raised, eyes forward. "This is my grandfather. He was erased before I ever had the chance to ask him how it felt to be brave." He unfolded a second item, one of Ora Bell's testimonies, copied from the archive, the ink still smudged from age. She wrote, "They told me to wait. I waited 23 years." She waited because she was told her story wasn't important, that it wasn't time. Ezra paused. Well, time is up. There were murmurs. A board member shifted in their seat. Another glanced at the audience. You say I violated policy, that I taught divisive content. But what I taught were facts, maps, documents, laws, lives. If your version of unity requires silence, then it's not unity, it's obedience. He reached into his coat and retrieved the redlined map of Marrowbone, unfolded it, and held it high. This is what they don't want to see. Not because it's a lie, but because it shows the design, the plan, the proof that what we are living was not an accident. A few heads nodded in the crowd. Some turned away. Ezra's voice did not rise. It deepened. They didn't just remove the mural. They removed memory. But memory returns, even if it has to claw its way through paint. He looked toward Kayla. She stared back, face unreadable, phone still raised. To those of you who listened in my classroom, thank you. And to those who didn't, you will. Someday. Because the truth waits. And when it comes, it doesn't ask permission. The room held stillness like breath. The board thanked him. Formally. Politely. As if he had just delivered a weather report. They recessed for 20 minutes. When they returned, their expressions had not changed. The superintendent read the decision in a low, even tone. Termination. Effective immediately. No appeal. The words floated in the gym like ash. Ezra nodded once, then gathered his materials. He walked out without a sound, past the rows of faces, some blank, some burning. As he passed Kayla, she reached out and touched his sleeve. He didn't look back. Outside, the night air was damp and cold. The gym lights glowed faintly behind him as if the building itself was ashamed. He walked to his car and drove slowly through the streets of Marrowbone, past shuttered stores and boarded houses, past the mural wall where the first lines of Clarence Whitlow's face now emerged. At a stop sign, Ezra glanced at his phone. The video of his speech was already live. Kayla had posted it. In an hour, it would be everywhere. Morning came slowly, like the town was unsure whether it deserved a new day. Ezra sat on his porch, wrapped in his old coat, a chipped mug of coffee cooling beside him. The air smelled like wet soil and wood smoke. A single bird chirped high in the bare branches, unsure of spring's arrival. He didn't turn on the news. He didn't check the views on Kayla's video. He didn't need to. Marrowbone felt different. It wasn't dramatic. There were no protests, no rallies, but there were shifts, small ones. People moved slower when they passed his house. Some looked up at the window where he had placed the photograph of Clarence Whitlow, now framed beneath the soft lace curtain. Students had started to post. One wrote, "He told us things we were never supposed to know. Now I want to know more." Another posted a scan of the redlined map, layered over Google Maps. "My house was undesirable. Still is to some." A third simply wrote, "He made me feel seen." The local news ran a short segment about the school board meeting. It showed a tight shot of Ezra's hands holding the map, but not his face. The caption read, "Community divided over controversial educators firing." Ezra laughed softly when he saw it. Divided, as if truth had caused the fracture and not the lie that came before it. A week passed. Then two. One afternoon, he received an envelope in the mail, hand-addressed. No return address. Inside was a letter from a regional museum of Black history in another state. They had seen the video. Someone had forwarded a scanned archive. They were offering to preserve it, catalog it, make it accessible. They wanted to name the collection after Clarence Whitlow. Ezra held the letter like it might vanish. That night, he walked to the mural wall. He brought no scraper this time, just his hands. The paint had begun to peel naturally now. Sun and time doing what they always did, bringing buried things to light. More of the image had returned. A second figure visible now, reaching toward Clarence. A child. Ezra hadn't remembered that part. Or maybe he'd never seen it. The town hadn't painted it over again. He touched the wall, palm flat, eyes closed. For the first time in weeks, he allowed the grief to rise, not just for the job or the silence, but for all the names that would never make it into textbooks all the stories told in back rooms and basements, all the truths still hidden. But there was peace, too. A strange, heavy peace. Not the kind handed out by school boards or polished into slogans, but the peace of knowing he hadn't turned away, that he had stood. Ezra returned home and opened the digital folder where he had begun organizing the archive. He renamed it Marrowbone, the unwritten chapters. He uploaded the final scans. The last page was Orabelle's testimony. He didn't add commentary. Her words were enough. Later that evening, as twilight spilled across the fields, Ezra sat again on the porch. Children passed on bikes, laughing. A neighbor waved. He waved back. The world hadn't changed. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something had cracked. And cracks, he knew, let light in.